The history of Indonesia, from ancient kingdoms to the world's largest archipelagic nation.
Indonesia, the world's largest archipelagic nation, is a country of immense cultural diversity and rich historical significance. With over 17,000 islands and hundreds of ethnic groups, Indonesia's history is a complex tapestry of indigenous kingdoms, foreign influences, colonialism, and the struggle for independence.
This video explores Indonesia's journey from its ancient kingdoms and the rise of powerful empires to the fight against colonial rule.
Early history and ancient kingdoms. Before 5th century CE, the islands that make up modern Indonesia have been inhabited for thousands of years. Early human activity in Indonesia dates back to the Paleolithic era, with Homo erectus remains found on the island of Java dating back over 1.5 million years. By around 2000 BCE, the Austronesian peoples began migrating to the Indonesian archipelago, bringing with them agricultural practices, pottery, and metalworking skills. Indonesia's location between the Indian and Pacific Oceans made it a crucial center for trade and cultural exchange. Early Indonesian societies were influenced by traders from India and China, who introduced Hinduism, Buddhism, and elements of Indian culture that would profoundly shape Indonesia's early kingdoms. The rise of Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms, 15th century. One of the earliest known kingdoms in Indonesia was the Tarumanagara kingdom, which flourished in West Java from the 4th to the 7th century. Influenced by Indian culture, Tarumanagara left inscriptions in Sanskrit, and its rulers followed Hindu traditions. Other early Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms, like Kutai in Kalimantan and Sriwijaya in Sumatra, also emerged around this time. Sriwijaya, 13th century, became one of the most powerful and influential empires in Southeast Asia. Based in Sumatra, it controlled much of the Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, and western Java. As a center of Mahayana Buddhism and trade, Sriwijaya was a hub for merchants from China, India, and the Arab world. The kingdom's wealth and power were derived from its control over the maritime trade routes passing through the Malacca Strait, a key link between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. At the same time, the Sailendra dynasty in central Java became famous for its construction of the Borobudur, the largest Buddhist monument in the world, in the 9th century. Borobudur stands as a testament to the region's Buddhist heritage and architectural prowess. Following the decline of Sriwijaya, the Majapahit Empire, 1293 to 1527, rose to prominence as the most powerful kingdom in the Indonesian archipelago. Based in East Java, Majapahit's influence extended throughout much of Southeast Asia, including modern-day Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, and the Philippines. The empire is remembered as the golden age of classical Indonesian civilization, with a flourishing of art, culture, and political unity across the archipelago. The spread of Islam and the rise of sultanates, 13th–17th century. By the 13th century, Islam began spreading across the Indonesian archipelago, introduced by Muslim traders from India, the Middle East, and China. The first Muslim sultanates emerged in the northern part of Sumatra, with the Sultanate of Samudra Pasai being one of the earliest. From there, Islam gradually spread to Java, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, and other islands. The rise of Islam in Indonesia coincided with the decline of Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms like Majapahit, and by the 15th century, Islamic sultanates had established themselves as powerful political and economic centers. One of the most prominent was the Sultanate of Malacca, which dominated trade in the region before falling to the Portuguese in 1511. The spread of Islam significantly influenced Indonesian culture, architecture, and society. Islamic schools and scholars became centers of learning, while the traditional arts adapted to Islamic sensibilities. The coexistence of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam in the archipelago created a rich tapestry of religious and cultural diversity. European colonization and the Dutch East India Company, 17th–19th century, European powers, drawn by the lucrative spice trade, began arriving in Indonesia in the early 16th century. The Portuguese were the first to establish a foothold in the region, capturing the strategic city of Malacca in 1511 and later moving into the Maluku Islands, the Spice Islands. However, their influence was soon challenged by the Dutch, who arrived in the late 16th century. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company, VOC, was established, and it quickly became the dominant European power in Indonesia. The VOC established a base in Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, and controlled key ports and trade routes across the archipelago. The company ruled ruthlessly, using both military force and diplomacy to control the spice trade and subdue local rulers. The VOC's influence began to decline in the 18th century due to corruption, mismanagement, and competition from other European powers. In 1800, the Dutch government took control of the company's holdings, marking the beginning of the Dutch colonial period in Indonesia. The Dutch expanded their control over the islands, establishing the Dutch East Indies and incorporating most of the archipelago into their colonial empire by the late 19th century. The Dutch colonial administration introduced cash crop plantations, forced labor systems, and harsh taxation policies, which caused widespread suffering among the Indonesian population. However, it was also a period of infrastructure development, as roads, railways, and ports were built to support the colony's economy. The struggle for independence, 1900 to 1949, the early 20th century saw the rise of Indonesian nationalism, as educated Indonesians became increasingly aware of the injustices of colonial rule. The Sarekat Islamic Union, was founded in 1912 as one of the first nationalist organizations, advocating for greater rights for Indonesians. By the 1920s and 1930s, more radical movements emerged, including the Indonesian National Party, PNI, led by Sukarno, who would become one of the most influential figures in the independence movement. World War II and the Japanese occupation of Indonesia, 1942 to 1945, marked a turning point in the struggle for independence. The Japanese ousted the Dutch and promised independence to the Indonesians in exchange for cooperation. Although Japanese rule was harsh, the occupation weakened Dutch control and allowed nationalist leaders like Sukarno and Muhammad Hatta to gain prominence. After Japan's surrender in 1945, Sukarno and Hatta declared Indonesian independence on August 17, 1945. However, the Dutch sought to reassert control, leading to a violent struggle for independence. The Indonesian National Revolution lasted from 1945 to 1949, with guerrilla warfare and diplomatic efforts playing key roles. Finally, in December 1949, the Dutch formally recognized Indonesia's independence, and Sukarno became the country's first president. Sukarno's presidency and guided democracy, 1949 to 1966, Indonesia's early years as an independent nation were marked by political instability and economic challenges. Sukarno sought to unite the country's diverse ethnic groups and political factions, but tensions between communists, Islamists, and nationalists made governance difficult. In 1957, Sukarno introduced a system known as guided democracy, which aimed to restore order by centralizing power in the presidency. He dissolved the parliament and ruled by decree, positioning himself as the symbolic leader of the nation. However, Sukarno's policies of aligning with communist countries like China and the Soviet Union alarmed the United States and other Western powers during the Cold War. By the mid-1960s, Indonesia was facing severe economic problems, political unrest, and a growing threat of communist influence. In 1965, a failed coup attempt known as the 30th of September movement led to a violent anti-communist purge, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of suspected communists. The Suharto era, New Order, 1966 to 1998, following the coup attempt, General Suharto rose to power, effectively removing Sukarno from office. In 1968, Suharto became Indonesia's second president, ushering in a period known as the New Order. Suharto's regime was characterized by authoritarianism, economic growth, and close ties with Western powers. Suharto implemented policies that favored economic development, attracting foreign investment and promoting industrialization. Under his rule, Indonesia experienced rapid economic growth, with significant improvements in infrastructure, education, and healthcare. However, this progress came at a high cost, as political opposition was suppressed, human rights abuses were widespread, and corruption became rampant. The Suharto government also pursued a policy of Pancasila, which emphasized unity, nationalism, and secularism. This policy helped maintain stability in Indonesia's diverse society, but it also stifled political dissent and limited freedom of expression. Suharto's rule came to an end in 1998, following the Asian financial crisis, which severely affected Indonesia's economy. Widespread protests and demands for reform forced Suharto to resign, ending his 32-year rule. Reformasi era and the modern Republic of Indonesia, 1998-present. Suharto's resignation marked the beginning of the Reformasi era, a period of democratization and political reform in Indonesia. The country transitioned to a more open political system, with free elections, a more decentralized government, and greater respect for human rights. Since the late 1990s, Indonesia has undergone significant changes, becoming one of Southeast Asia's most vibrant democracies. The country has also played an important role in regional and global affairs, being a founding member of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and participating in the G20. Indonesia continues to face challenges, including economic inequality, environmental issues, and maintaining social harmony in a nation with such immense diversity. However, its history of resilience and adaptation suggests that Indonesia will continue to play a vital role in the global community. Conclusion: Indonesia's history is a story of cultural diversity, colonialism, and the enduring struggle for independence. From ancient kingdoms and powerful empires to the challenges of modern statehood, Indonesia has emerged as one of the world's most dynamic nations. Today, as a thriving democracy with a growing economy, Indonesia continues to be a key player in the Southeast Asian region and beyond.